Welcome to Office 2013 video project number 19. Hey, we're going to start talking about Excel, the most used program in the world and probably the most important program to use in your career. Hey, we're in Windows Explorer. I have my jump drive in. Drilling down, looking in our class notes Excel folder. We don't have any files. It says 0 files. Let's open up a blank Excel workbook file. I'm going to come down to the taskbar and click on the green X. You can also use the Start button or the Tiles window in Windows 8. Just like in other Office 2013 programs, Word, PowerPoint, for example, we get this screen. We can either click here, hit Enter, or click Escape to open up a empty file. Now in Excel, we don't call this file a document. We call it a workbook. So up here it says Book 1. Book is short for workbook. That's not a good name, so I'm going to hit F12, save as, and I'm going to save it to my class notes Excel. All right, so save as. I've drilled down. There's our location. We're going to call this grade books. The file extension, the default .xlsx. That X means you can't have macros or code. The M means you can. We're going to keep it as the default. Click Save. So we look up in the title bar. There's our name, .xlsx. All right, so now we're here in Excel. In a few videos ahead, we'll come back and talk about the ribbons and the quat. We have 3 videos, video project 19, 20, and 21. They're just small introduction projects so we can just get in, get our hands dirty, practice some Excel stuff, and then we'll come back and talk about all the technical aspects of Excel. But before we start, we do want to understand the layout in Excel. There's letters. So the letter G says, hey, this is column G. The row 5, 6, 7. So 7 says this is row 7. If we have an intersection of a letter column and a row, the number right there, that is called a cell, and its name is G7. You can see up here in the name box, that's G7. This is my selection cursor. I can click. If I select C3, I can see that there's a C and a 3, and it says C3 up there. Now, column, row, cell, all of the cells together are called a worksheet or a sheet. You can see down here it says sheet. Sheet is short for worksheet. That sheet name, sheet 1, is not a good name for our sheet, so we want to rename this. Now this down here is called a sheet tab. We can double click the sheet tab and rename it. When it's highlighted, you can type a name and hit enter. You can also right click and point to rename. So this is a sheet tab, and we're going to name it Gradebook Fall F13. Now I'm going to hit enter. So column are letters, rows are numbers, cells have addresses C3. All the cells together are called a worksheet or simply sheet. Down here is a sheet tab. We can double click it and rename it. That sheet tab is the name of the sheet. Now, I want to come over here and click the plus. That'll add a new sheet. Now you can move these by, this is your selection cursor. You can see up here we might go and get font color with that diagonal white arrow. Well, we can also point to sheets. And I'm going to click and drag. Now notice I'm clicking and holding. That little piece of paper right there, that's a worksheet. That's a little picture for worksheet. And that black arrow says where I'm going to drop it. So when I drag it and I see that black arrow, I'm going to drop it. And now I'm going to double click this. And I'm going to call this Notes. Enter. So now I have 2 sheets. Anytime you get 1 or more sheets, then you have what's called a workbook. So column, row, cell, all the cells are a worksheet or sheet. The sheet name is down on the sheet tab, and all the sheet tabs, all of the sheets together make up a workbook. Now we're going to create a workbook here and see some basic style formatting, number formatting, data entry, and formulas. All right, we're going to click in cell A1. In the first column, we're going to have student name. So I'm going to type the word name. So I'm selecting cell A1 and I simply type name. I'm going to hit tab because I'm immediately going to put that thing in the cell and then jump to the right and type something else. Here I'm going to type quiz space 01. Now instead of hitting tab, which would go to the right, or enter, which would go down, I'm going to use control enter. Control enter puts the thing you just typed out into the cell and keeps the cell selected. The reason why I wanted to keep it selected is because I immediately wanted to do something to it. Now, we saw this is the selection cursor. And when we have a cell selected, there's like a green box around it. But in that lower corner there, that little dark green square is called the fill handle. And the fill handle will do a lot of amazing things for us in Excel. But move your selection cursor close. And when it gets near the fill handle, it'll turn to what is called a crosshair. Or I like to call it an angry rabbit. Now, you got to be careful. That cursor right there is the move cursor. Diagonally pointing white arrow with a 4-way black arrow underneath. If I click and drag here, it will move it. And I'll show you. This is what happens is people accidentally move it. Now, no problem. We know Control Z is undo. Control Z. What we want to do is not do our selection cursor, not do our move cursor. We want our angry rabbit. Now, click and drag, and Excel does something amazing. It will increment. Anytime you have a word and numbers, it will increment. Now, I want to click in cell E1 and type test1. Control enter. Put the thing in the cell, keep the cell selected. Take my cursor, move it towards that fill handle. And when I see my crosshair or angry rabbit, I can click and drag. Now, I did 0, 1 here, and 1 here just to show you that it will increment in either case and continue the pattern. Now, let's click in cell H1 and type total. Tab, percentage symbol, grade, and then enter. Now, the next row in our table will contain the maximum possible score. So I'm going to type max. And then here, for each one of the quizzes, the maximum possible points are 20. So I'm going to type 20 and control enter. We immediately want to notice something about raw data in Excel. Words are always aligned by default to the left, and numbers are always by default aligned to the right. Now, that is really important because when you have lots of data, you can immediately tell what's a number and what is text. Now, that seems silly if you're just learning Excel for the first time, but sometimes you'll get numbers dumped into Excel that are being treated as text, and formulas don't like numbers that are treated as text. So when you see a number that's aligned like text, you know there's potentially some trouble. So this default alignment, numbers to the right, text to the left, is pretty helpful. Now, I want to copy this because each quiz is worth 20. So I'm going to take my selection cursor and move it closer to that fill handle. And when I see my angry rabbit, I'm going to click and drag. Now, notice this time it did not increment. It's only when you have words and numbers. Now, later we'll learn a trick for incrementing because sometimes you want to increment. But all we told Excel there was please copy the number 20. Now, let's do the same thing for test 100, control enter. Grab my fill handle with my angry rabbit and click and drag. It copied that 100. We'll come back and do the total and the percentage grade later. Now, I want to enter the names. So the first name is Sue. Enter. So we've seen 3 ways to enter stuff into Excel. Type, tab, puts the thing in the cell and moves to the right. Type, control enter, puts the thing in the cell and keeps the cell selected. Type, enter, puts the thing in the cell and puts the cursor down. All 3 of those can be used more efficiently than just always using enter. Phil, enter. Tom, enter. Chin, enter. Sheila, enter. Mo, enter. Gigi, enter. And I'm going to type at the bottom average because we'll calculate using a formula the average. Enter for each one of the quizzes later. Now looking at this, you can clearly see all the text items are aligned to the left, all the numbers are aligned to the right. Now let's learn, and we want to do some stylistic formatting before we enter our raw data and create some formulas. Now the first thing I would like to do is highlight the whole table. There's a few ways we could do this. We could take our selection cursor and not the angry rabbit, the selection cursor, and click and drag. And so I'm clicking, holding the click and dragging, and there I've highlighted the whole table. Then I could come up and do something like borders. There's a useful keyboard shortcut to highlight the entire table, and we will use this a lot in this class. You got to find the asterisk on the number pad. Control asterisk. Now, if I'm selected in the middle of nowhere, if I control asterisk, it doesn't highlight anything. But if you're touching some of the data, when you control asterisk, it highlights the whole table. Now, the way it does that is it immediately looks, we started right here, it immediately looks everywhere until it sees nothing and stops. And it did the same thing over here. It stopped right there. Now, you can use Control Shift 8. That'll work also. But Control asterisk on the number pad is pretty convenient. So now we're going to come up to the font group. And we want to select the drop down for borders and select all borders. This is a stylistic formatting. We're adding some borders to each cell. Now, I'd like to highlight the first row and format this first row differently than all of the rest of the table. Now, the text at the top of each one of these columns is important. It tells the user only put the data test 1 in this column. Here, only quiz 3. Right over here, only the total. These have a special name. Anytime you have text at the top of the column, these are called column headers or field names. And you want to format them differently than the rest of the data in the table. I'm going to come up to the font group, and let's use the paint bucket or fill color. This puts a fill into the cell, like pouring the bucket of paint right into the cell. So I'm going to select red. Now notice here we have red fill and black font. But the problem is this wouldn't print out very well. It would be hard to see the difference between the text and the red fill. And the way you can always tell whether the value difference isn't big enough is squint your eyes. If you squint your eyes and you can't see the difference between the text and the fill color, you know the value difference is not big enough. So I'm going to come up to the fill and pour my paint into the cell. I'm going to pick something really dark. Then I'm going to come up to font and pick something really light. Now next, this row right here is also separate than the rest of the data. All the rest of the data is student names and scores, and we'll have formulas. We will later copy this worksheet over for spring 2013, summer, winter, etc. And we'll change all this data. But this field name or column label up at the top, and then this max scores, these are probably not going to change. So I'm going to differentiate this data from the rest of the raw data by formatting it differently. So I'm going to come up to the fill and maybe some yellow. All right, now we want to enter the scores. So for the quizzes, I'm going to click in B3 and drag all the way to D and then down. So I've highlighted in advance. What's nice about this is that light colored cell is called the active cell. And when you put in data into multiple columns and you want to enter, 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 and when you get to the bottom, you don't want to have to take your mouse and come up and click. You want to just be able to hit enter and jump off. You pre-highlight or select the cells and start typing from the active cell, the light colored cell. 15, enter. 16, enter. Gigi got 20, and now when I hit enter, oh, it jumps up to the next. I love that little trick there. Wow, so Gigi got 20 and then 8, enter, and it jumps back to the top. And now when I hit enter, it jumps back to the top. So that's a convenient way sometimes to enter data. Now let's do the same thing for the tests. Active cell, enter, 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 and it will jump to the top. Next, we'd like to create our first formulas. Down here, we're going to have to create a formula that calculates the average for each one of the quizzes. Over here in the totals column, we're going to have a formula that adds up each one of the rows. And then over here, we're going to have to compare each student's total to the total possible to get a percentage grade. We're going to come down to B10 and select B10. And we're going to do our first formula. Now, up here we entered numbers and text or words. We just typed and then hit Tab, Enter, or Control, Enter. So here we have to differentiate between raw data and a formula. And the way you tell Excel, hey, I want to calculate a formula, is you type an equal sign as the first character in the cell. Now, our first formula is going to involve calculating an average. And we're going to use a built-in function called average. So you type out AVER, and sure enough, there's a drop down. That little f of x, that is the icon that says there's a function available for you to calculate some calculation. For us, we could calculate average. And look over here. This tells you the description of what the function will do. Arithmetic mean. That's what we want. We want to add them all up and divide by the count. You can either keep typing and then type in open parentheses. You can use your mouse to double click. However, the fastest way to enter this function is once it's blue, hit Tab. And it's asking for all the numbers. Now, we're going to take our selection cursor and watch this. If I click in the first score, not the max, but the first one, and click, you can already see the dancing ants are starting to dance. Down in the formula, you can see B3, but now I'm still holding my click and I'm dragging. I'm dragging all the way down from cell B3 to B9. Now watch this. The dancing ants are dancing around. If you make a mistake, oh no, wait a second. Just keep selecting. As long as the dancing ants are moving, you're in redirect mode. You can redirect the references you want to put into your formula. So I'm going to click in B3 and drag all the way down to B9. Now for this function, we could enter lots of different sets of ranges from all over the spreadsheet, but that's all we have. I'm going to close parentheses and Control Enter. Now look at just like that, it shows us the result. Now the cell shows the result. The formula bar will show the formula. Now I want to point something out. The original two guys who invented the very first spreadsheet, VisiCalc, Bricklin and Frankston, they had this idea. They didn't want to have to type 15, 16, 12, 16, 11, 18, and 20 into their handheld calculator and then make some average calculation. And the reason they didn't want to type it in, because what if Phil's score was actually 20? If you had a handheld calculator, you'd have to type each one of these numbers back into your handheld calculator. But the genius of Bricklin and Frankston inventing the spreadsheet is now we have a formula here. Up in the formula, we can see it. It's pointing. Watch this. Down here, I don't want to have to look up here. I actually want to see not the formula result, but the formula in the cell. I'm going to hit the F2 key. F2 puts the cell in edit mode. And you can see the blue. It's not dancing ants. That means you're not in redirect mode. But there it is. Those cell references are what we're putting inside our Excel formula instead of typing these numbers into a handheld calculator. And what that means, Control Enter, is now I'm allowed to just come up to Phil's score and type 19. Now watch this. Before I hit Enter, keep your eye here. When I hit Enter, instantly it updates. If Tom's was 20, Enter, instantly it updates. That's the beauty of Excel. Control Z, Z. Now let me show you what you'd never ever want to do. This is the most ridiculous formula ever. Alright, I typed out the most ridiculous formula ever. I added all the scores up and then divided by the count. There's 7 students. This is called hard coding your data or your numbers into the formula. Watch this. When I control enter, I get the exact same result. But watch this. Now when I change Phil's to 19, enter, and Tom's to 20, enter. This is beautiful. It updates perfectly. This one will never update. Excel's golden rule. If the data that's going into the formula can change, put it into the cells and refer to it, F2, with cell references. I'm going to control Z just to keep those numbers, the original ones we typed in. Now, let's learn something else. Click in cell B10 and F2. Another genius move when the spreadsheet was invented is right now, that formula is beautiful, right? But what if I had to come over to this cell here and type a whole new one? Close parentheses tab. This would take forever, right? Oh, yuck. If I had to do every single one like that, Control Z. So instead of having to do it individually, they created what's called relative cell references. That range of cells, B3 to B9, yes, for this particular cell, it is looking at B3 to B9. But if you copy the formula, then the formula is not really looking at B3 to B9. It's looking at the 7 cells above where the formula is. That means relative to me, the formula, where am I, the formula, going to always look? I'm always going to look 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers directly above me. Control enter, and let's use our angry rabbit and copy this formula over. I'm just going to copy over one. Click and drag. So here we're using our angry rabbit to copy a formula. Click in the cell and F2. It doesn't say B3 to B9. Now it says for this particular calculation, C3 to C9. But when you're copying, the formula sees not C3 to C9, but hey, the 7 numbers directly above me. Control enter, and now let's copy it all the way over. I'm going to click in the last cell and put it in edit mode to make sure the formula is correct. That is beautiful. It's looking at the 7 numbers above me. It doesn't say B3 to B9. For this particular calculation, it says G3 to G9. But you want to think of this how Excel thinks of this. When you're copying the formulas, it's not really G3 to G9 or B3 to B9. It's the relative to me, the formula. I'm always going to look 7 above. Enter. Now, let's go and try a different formula. We want to click in H2, and we want to add all of the max scores. Here we're going to use a function, not the average function, but the sum function. Now the sum function is the most common function, so we can come up home ribbon, editing group, and there's the auto sum button. If you click, it's going to do a few things. It's really polite. It puts the equal sign, the sum, even the open and close parentheses, and it's guessing. Now it's trying to be polite. This guess is not always correct, and we'll see lots of examples in this class when it's not correct. But right now, the dancing ants are dancing around the correct numbers, so we can simply control enter. But before we control enter, notice B2 to G2. Those are the cells that it's going to look at for this calculation. But if we copy the formula down, it's not going to be B2 to G2. It's going to be, please add the 6 cells to my left. Relative cell references. Control enter. And now let's take our cursor, point to the fill handle with our angry rabbit, and click and drag all the way down to GG's row here. So we've added them up, but wait a second. When you use your angry rabbit and fill handle to copy something, it'll always copy the formatting and the content. In this case, a formula. Luckily, there's a smart tag. I love these smart tags. I'm going to point to it. Click on that little drop down arrow and fill without formatting. And boom, we have copied the formula without any formatting. Now I'm going to click in the last cell and hit F2. And sure enough, the relative cell references are working perfectly. They're adding the 6 cells to my left. We're getting the correct total for GG. All right, now two formulas so far. We said equals, and we used the built-in function sum with relative cell references. Escape. F2. Here we used average built-in function with some relative cell references and copied them over. Now we want to click in cell I3. And here, and throughout this whole column, we need to calculate the percentage grade. And the way we do that is for each student, we take their total points that they earned divided by the total points. When we get down to the next student, we're going to take Phil's 290. That's part of the total points, and compare it to the total points doing division. 287, that's the points that Tom got compared to 360, max possible. In each case, when we do that division, it will give us a decimal, a number 1 or less. Now let's just see what would happen. What if someone got a max score, 360 out of 360? I'm going to click in cell I2 and watch this. I'm going to say equals, hey, there's the score I got, divided by, there's the total possible. Now when I hit enter, any number divided by itself is 1. So in this case, when there's no extra credit, the maximum possible number you can get is 1. Otherwise, if you get anything less than 360, it's going to be a number less than 1. So for Sue, we are going to type an equal sign, click on 283, and divide by the total possible. When I hit enter, 0.7861. Now later we'll format this column as a percentage and show it as a percentage. Type an equal sign. I'm going to click on Phil's total points divided by, that's a math operator, / is division in Excel. Then I'm going to take my cursor and click on the total points. When I hit enter, I get 0.8055. Now we want to talk about a few ways to enter cell references into formulas. Now so far we've gone equals, click, divide by, math operator, click. So we're clicking to get our cell references. Another way to do it is to use your arrow key. So I can type equals, and if I left arrow, it hunts for cell references. Now watch, just like redirect mode, if I'm hunting with my arrow keys, I'm clicking all my different arrows. As long as the dancing ants are moving, you can redirect it. When you get the cell reference, you continue typing your formula. Division, and then I'm going to left arrow, up, 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 up. Now, the difference is, if your cell references are close, it's faster to use your arrow keys. If they're far away, then of course it's probably faster to use your mouse. All right, now let's look at this formula. It looks like this whole column is always going one cell to my left, a relative cell reference, but it's always dividing by H2. Enter equals one cell to my left divided by H2. Enter equals one cell to my left divided by H2. So every one of these formulas in this column, they're using H2. If we were to come up here and create a formula and copy it down, in fact, let's do that. I'm going to highlight all these and delete. Ready? Equals left arrow divided by left arrow, up arrow. Now, that would be great if I could Control Enter and copy it down. But that's not going to work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because they're both relative cell references. So I look in the second cell. Well, when I put H2 up here, it was really one cell to my left and one up. So when I come down to Sheila's and hit F2, oh yeah, relative cell reference 1 to my left, that's the blue one, divided by relative cell reference 1 to my left and 1 up. So that won't work. If we want a quick way to enter, I'm going to F2, enter a formula with a relative cell reference, but also a cell reference that's locked down, we have to learn a new type of cell reference, absolute. So in this formula, I want relative cell reference 1 to my left divided by absolutely H2. The way you convert a relative cell reference to an absolute is by putting a special symbol in. And the symbol's arbitrary. Back in the beginning of the spreadsheet, they just picked it and said, OK, we're going to use this symbol. It's the $ sign. Now, don't type them in. Just hit the F4 key. those two dollar signs. The dollar sign in front of the column reference H, the dollar sign in front of the row reference 2. That means no matter where you copy this formula, it's locked down on H2. So now if I Control Enter and click with my angry rabbit and drag down, I go to the very last cell always to verify whether my formula is correct. I'm going to hit F2. Oh, that is amazing. And it saves so much time. I didn't have to type each one of these different formulas. I just type 1 as long as I know relative cell reference and absolutely locked on H2. Now I want to delete these and try this again. I use the delete key. Let me Control Z. Don't do this. Right click delete. Now right here it wouldn't hurt to right click delete because there's nothing below. But watch this. If I right click this cell because I want to delete it, instead of just use the delete key, right click delete, it's asking me, what do you want to do? Shift cells up? That sounds like trouble. If I click OK, it wrecks my whole spreadsheet because it shifts everything up. Control Z to undo that. Right click delete. Rarely do you want to use that. If it's just content you want to delete, highlight, and what's the keyboard shortcut for delete? Yeah, that's right, the delete key that deletes the content. All right, so I'm going to click back in cell I3. Equals left arrow divided by, and I'm going to get H2. Now here's the trick to the F4 key. Your cursor has to be touching the cell reference, and it can be in the middle, it can be in the front. But if it's somewhere else in the formula, like before the equal sign, now if I hit the F4 key, it's not working. So your cursor has to be touching the cell reference. That will work. If it's after the 2, that will work. If it's before the H, that will work. So touching any part of the cell reference, F4 key will put the dollar signs in. Now let's Control Enter, and instead of pointing and clicking and dragging down, there's a much better way when you're copying your formula down a column and you have something to the left. Notice this formula needs to be copied down all the way, and there's something always to the left, and then there's an empty cell. Simply point to your fill handle, and with your angry rabbit, you double click. I'm going to go to the last cell and hit F2. There it is. I love it. That saves so much time. Relative cell reference 1 to my left divided by absolutely H2. All right, so now let's format this. And the way we can format this is using number formatting. Now earlier we learned about stylistic formatting, things like fill color, font color, borders, and there's some other types of stylistic formatting. But now we want to learn about number formatting. I'm going to highlight these numbers here. And the number group, I'm not going to use this one. This one's trouble. We will talk about that button later in this class. We'll talk lots about number formatting. But let's just see, since 2007, there's been this great drop down. Oh, there's all sorts of cool things. Currency, accounting, dates, time, and there's the one we want, percentage. So if I click, boop, and you can see it's going to show me 2 decimals. It gives me a preview there. So there we have it. Now I'm going to Control Z. The Format Cells dialog box has all the options. And again, we'll talk about this later. We have whole videos with later in this class that discuss nothing but number formatting. To get to the dialog box, you can either click the launcher or the keyboard shortcut Control 1. Control 1. Now format cells, right? That's all we have in Excel. We have cells. We put numbers, text, formulas. So there's so many things you can do to format the cells, and this Format Cells dialog box has all the options. I'm going to come down to percentage, and you can see here one advantage is that we can put whatever number of decimals. If I want to show 1, I click OK. Now, number formatting is a facade. Anything you choose from here, it didn't actually round the numbers. Those unrounded numbers are still in the cells. Now, one way to see that is to apply general. Anytime you have any number format and you want to get back to the unformatted numbers and see what's really there, you apply general. So if I apply general, you could see those decimals are all still there. When I click percentage, boop, all it does is make the surface of the spreadsheet look like there's only 2 decimals. If you come out here and do a multiplication, so if you had equals 100 times that percentage, it should come out to be 79.72. But you'll see that it doesn't. That formula does not recognize that number formatting. Why? Because number formatting is a facade. It sits on the surface of the spreadsheet. It's just there to look at. Any formula that points to that cell there will look at the underlying number. And we'll talk lots about that later in this class. One thing you do need to take away right now is that number formatting is a facade. All right, so we have our spreadsheet looking exactly how we want it. Now let's Control P and see if print will work. Well, I guess it's there's a page 1 of 2. If I click the next page, I can see, well, I don't want that. And I don't want to include that either. Not only that, but I want to turn it on its side landscape and make it a little bit bigger and have headers and footers. So I'm going to click Escape, Page Setup in Excel. We go out to Page Layout. Page Setup group. There's lots of great things in this page layout group, but not all of the options are in the ribbons, just like we saw with our Format Cells dialog box. So Page Setup, the group, and there's a dialog launcher. Boop. So we can come here, and there's 4 tabs. Let's look at each one in turn. Portrait. I don't want portrait. I want to say landscape. Now, adjust. I'm going to say, just guess here. I'm going to guess 120. That means it'll not change what we see here or the zoom here. That's for when you're printing it. Another great option, we don't have a use for it here, but if your page is not quite fitting to one page, if you click Fit to 1 page wide by 1 page tall, boom, it instantly fits it. You don't have to mess like we did in Word with font or paragraph level settings or anything. All right, so we're going to say adjust to 120% of normal, landscape. Let's go over to margins. Margins, you could mess around with these. Most of the time, just horizontal will work. Horizontal fits it perfectly in the middle of the page. Vertical usually doesn't look good, especially for small tables. All right, so we've set our margins. Let's go to headers and footers. Now, there's 3 sections. That's the preview. Right now, we have nothing. There's some built-in options for header from the drop-down, and then there's custom header. We'll look at that in a moment. Here's the preview for footer. There's nothing. Here's the built-in. Here's the custom footer. Let's try a built-in one here. I'm going to click the drop-down. Page 1 of question mark. When I select this, you instantly see the preview change. That means it will print if you had 10 pages, 1 of 10, 2 of 10, 3 of 10, etc. Now we only have page 1 of 1, but that will be fine for us right now. That way, if we drop it on the ground with a bunch of other papers, we know, hey, 1 of 1, that's the only page I need. All right, let's go up to custom header. Boop. And we have 3 sections, left, center, and right. There's a bunch of great buttons here. This one will put the page number. This will put the total number of pages. Date, and these are all dynamic. If I have more pages coming later, it'll update. Any day that I print this out, it'll put today's date. Today's time, dynamic. The file path, workbook name, and even sheet name. Now for us, this one's going to work because our sheet says Gradebook Fall 13. So if I click boop, it puts the code in for sheet tab name. If I change this, our header will automatically update. I'm going to click Tab. Center, I'm going to put the date, space, dash, space, and the time. That'll always give me the date and time that I print this out. Tab, and so over here in the right section, you can type whatever you want. You could type your name or the business name. I'm going to type Class 101. And you could actually highlight. Go to this font button and add any formatting that you want. I'm going to add bold, 14. Click OK. And so now the actual header will have some formatting. Click OK. And now we can see our preview for our footer, our preview for our header, Looking good. Now let's go to the next tab in our page setup dialog box, Sheet. Now there's a bunch of cool things, and we'll look at some of these things later in the class. But here we want to look at print area, because all we want to do is print out our table. We don't want these calculations below and over to the side to print out also. You click in the print area text box, and anytime you see this collapse button, that means you're allowed to connect the text box to the cells by simply clicking with your selection cursor and dragging. Just like if you were highlighting a range for a formula, the dancing ants are dancing. And you can redirect as often as you would like, as long as the dancing ants are going. Okay, so we have our A10 to I10 range. We're done with the page setup. Let's click OK. Now let's do Control P. Oh, that is amazing. Look at that. We have our footer, our headers. We've increased the size. Looking good. You know, there's one last thing. We probably want to decrease the decimals here. So I'm going to click Escape to get rid of Print Preview. Now, these cells down here, we can apply a number formatting. I'm going to highlight with my selection cursor, go up to Home. And just like we did over here with percentage, now we're going to use the decreased decimal. This doesn't change the number, it just applies a formatting on the surface of the cells. So I'm going to decrease, and I can see one at a time. Click, click, it decreases. I'll stop, showing just 2 decimals. All right, so that's looking good. Now, it says Gradebook Fall 2013. In fact, I'm going to edit this name. I'm going to click down here, double click, and put my cursor after the F and type ALL. Our sheet name, which is connected to our header, Control P. Oh, it's absolutely updated. That is beautiful. Now let's escape and copy this sheet over so we can use it for next quarter. Now this example here could be anything. We could have a monthly budget or a daily sales sheet. Anytime you get your sheet looking good, you want to copy it over. Now there's a couple ways we could do this. Right click, move or copy. And if you want to copy, you immediately have to look down here and check Create a Copy. If you don't create a copy, it just moves it. And then it asks you before which sheet. I'm going to say Move to the end. Not only that, here we're copying the sheet from this workbook to somewhere else in this workbook. But notice we could use the top drop down and select a new workbook or any other open workbook that we had. I'm going to click Escape there. All right, so I'm going to move to the end and click OK. And just like that, I have a second sheet. Now, if you needed to delete a sheet, you could right-click Delete. It warns you this cannot be undone. I'm going to click Delete. Another way to copy is it's a combination keyboard mouse. Now, earlier we saw how to move. Now, if we click and drag with our diagonal white arrow, you see that black triangle pointing down. That means when we let go of our click, it will move it. But watch this. Already with my mouse clicking and moving it, I'm going to hold Control and watch the piece of paper. Now the piece of paper has a plus, and that plus means we're copying it. So now when my triangle is in the right place, I let go of the mouse, not Control. That's the fastest way to copy. So now I can click with Control, drag up, I see the plus, let go of the mouse. Now I can come down to this second gradebook, double click it, highlight the last bit, and call this Winter 2013. Enter. And then I come up here and I delete all of the raw data. All of these are formulas, names, numbers. I'm deleting just the raw data. All of these errors and zeros will fix once we start putting data. Now let's go to our next sheet. Click the sheet, and I'm going to call this one Spring 2013. Enter. Highlight for this spring, just the names, just the number data. Hit delete. Later in the class, we'll see a cool function called if error to hide that error. So what we've done on these second two sheets, spring and winter, is we've used an existing template, simply copy the sheet, and now we can enter our data. Let's go back to Gradebook Fall 13. We want to look at two last things. Actually, three last things. This little calculation here, for us in the class, this was important. So I want to type a label here so when we come back and look at this later, we know what this is. And I'm going to type formulas, do not see number formatting. Remember, enter F2. If that $100 was really being multiplied by 79.72%, the answer would be 79.72, but it's not. See, the formula sees under and looks at the unformatted number. F2, that was a silly formula. Escape. Now watch this. I'm going to move this. I'm going to use my move cursor there. Click and drag to move it down. I don't want it touching here because I'm going to type a label right here. So I just put a note there. Formula inputs that can change must be put into cells and referred to in formulas with cell references. All right, so we labeled those. And two other things. We saw up here how to increment with our Angry Rabbit, text with numbers. But just to remind you, we did this earlier in class when we looked at word tables. If I type the word JAN, Control Enter, if I point to my fill handle with my Angry Rabbit and click and drag, it is programmed to increment months. That is absolutely amazing. It also can do Monday. Control Enter. If you copy this one over, it will do all the way, and you can see that cool little screen tip. Sunday, and then once you go past, it'll start repeating the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Another cool Angry Rabbit trick. Hey, let's do Monday again. Control Enter. Point to your fill handle when you see your Angry Rabbit. Click and drag, and watch this. This is the Smart Tag. Whoa, down here at the bottom it says Fill Weekdays. Now we have Sunday, but as soon as we click Fill Weekdays, boom, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Monday, Tuesday. Oh, that is just amazing. This will also work for dates. I'm going to put today's date, 10/23/2013. Control Enter. I'm going to come up to the drop down, and I want a short date just to show month and day. I do not see it here, so I'm going to use my keyboard, Control 1. And sure enough, under date, there's a bunch of other options. The Format Cells dialog box has it all. I'm going to select that one and click OK. Now watch this. When I point to the fill handle with my Angry Rabbit and click and drag, it will increment the days. That's amazing. Now let's look at this Smart Tag on the dates. There's all sorts of amazing ones. Days is the default. We could say weekdays, and instantly they're just the weekdays. We could point to the Smart Tag months. You're kidding me. 10/23, 11/23. I'm going to go back to days. So there's amazing things that the Angry Rabbit can do. How about numbers? 1, tab, 2. Now up here we saw when we copied the 20, it copied 20. But if you highlight two numbers and then use your Angry Rabbit, it will increment. Here it's adding 1. It could easily do add 10 if the two numbers establish the pattern adding 10 when you use your Angry Rabbit. Oh, that is amazing. It can do subtraction. How do you get to 5 from 10? You subtract 5. So when I Angry Rabbit this, boom. So there's a bunch of amazing things we can do with incrementing text like January or February, days, even dates and numbers. Now there's one last thing I'd like to show you. I'm going to enter some numbers here. Quick 2, 1. I've entered some numbers, and I want to look more at double clicking to send something down a column. If we use Alt equals, that's the keyboard for AutoSum, Control Enter, we saw earlier how if we double click and send it down, no way, it works all the way to the bottom. Now it worked here because it always looked to the left, and when it finally found an empty cell, it stopped. If I delete this and come over here on the right, Alt equals, I guess totally wrong, but we can redirect it. So now we want to Control Enter. It's adding these two numbers. Double click. Oh, it looked to the right. Delete. Delete key. Now, what if we had a column and it had some text or something, and we clicked in Q8 and did Alt equals. Now when we Control Enter, if we double click, it's not going to look to the left because there's stuff below, it just fills until it sees no more stuff below. So it looks below first, then to the left and right. All right, now notice we did a bunch of stuff here. If we Control P, is our print job still perfect? Because we did our page setup and set print area, all of this is ignored. Wow, so in this first video, Excel 2013, we learned a lot about entering data, some formulas, some formatting, number formatting, even some page setup and incrementing. Now, if you look below the video, there's a link. If you click on that link, you can download some notes I have. Also, this workbook, this finished workbook, I'm going to F12 to save as, and I'm going to change the name of this workbook. Gradebooks Video 19 Excel Basics 1. So you can download this workbook if you want also. This is our first video in Excel Basics for Office 2013. We'll see you next video.